In the winter of 1852, on a tobacco plantation near the James River in Virginia, 13-year-old Thomas Carter died with the body and mind of a 2-year-old child. His death marked the end of what medical authorities called the most inexplicable case of human development reversal ever documented in American history. Over the course of 3 years, Thomas had undergone a transformation so disturbing that it challenged every understanding of human growth, aging, and the fundamental nature of biological time itself. What started as delayed physical development had evolved into something that defied natural law. Thomas didn't simply stop growing. He began shrinking, both physically and mentally, regressing through the stages of human development in reverse chronological order. By the time of his death, he had lost the ability to walk, talk, or recognize his own family members. Medical examination revealed that his brain had physically restructured itself to match that of an infant, while his skeletal system had compressed and his organs had reverted to developmental stages he had completed years earlier. The evidence I'm about to share with you tonight has been buried in Virginia State Archives for over 170 years. Medical records that were immediately sealed after Thomas's death, physician testimonies that were deemed too disturbing for public disclosure, and physical evidence that suggests backward growth may not be as impossible as modern science claims, and that it could potentially happen again. Before we venture into this medical nightmare that unfolded in antebellum Virginia, I need you to know that this channel explores the darkest corners of documented American history, places where medical impossibility meets terrifying reality. If you're brave enough to confront evidence that challenges everything we think we know about human development, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comments what state you're watching from, because the environmental factors that caused Thomas Carter's condition might exist closer to your home than you think. The nightmare began not with Thomas's regression, but with the hidden contamination that would trigger the most impossible medical phenomenon in recorded history. The Carter family had farmed the same stretch of Virginia Piedmont land for over a century when Thomas was born in March 1839. Their 300-acre plantation stretched along the James River bottomland, encompassing some of the finest tobacco-growing soil in the Commonwealth. The property had been in the family since 1742, when Thomas's great-great-grandfather, William Carter, received it as a land grant for his service in the colonial militia. What the Carter family didn't know was that their ancestral farm sat atop one of the largest natural uranium deposits on the eastern seaboard. The radioactive ore lay buried 15 feet beneath their fields, slowly leaching radiation into the groundwater and soil for over a century. Every crop they grew, every well they dug, every breath of dust they inhaled carried particles of death that would accumulate in their bodies over generations. The geological surveys that would eventually identify this contamination wouldn't be conducted until 1923, 70 years too late to save Thomas Carter. But the evidence was there for anyone who knew how to read it. The unusual number of stillbirths among the Carter family livestock, the strange blue-green discoloration that appeared on metal tools left in their fields overnight, the way their tobacco leaves grew in twisted, unnatural patterns that local farmers attributed to poor soil management. Thomas Carter was born into this environment of invisible poison. His developing cells bathed in radiation from the moment of conception. His mother, Sarah, had been exposed to the contaminated groundwater throughout her pregnancy, drinking from the family well that drew directly from the radioactive aquifer beneath their property. His father, William, worked the contaminated fields daily, bringing radioactive dust home on his clothes and skin. The early signs of contamination were subtle enough to escape notice in an era when infant mortality was commonplace and medical understanding was primitive. Thomas appeared healthy at birth, weighing a robust 8 pounds, with clear eyes and strong lungs. But the radiation was already working its way through his developing nervous system, altering the fundamental processes that governed human growth and development. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the county physician who attended Thomas's birth, noted nothing unusual in his medical records. The boy met all expected developmental milestones during his first year, rolling over at 4 months, sitting up at 6 months, taking his first steps at 14 months. To all outward appearances, Thomas Carter was a normal, healthy child growing up on a prosperous Virginia plantation. But the radiation damage was accumulating in his cells, disrupting the complex hormonal and neurological processes that regulate human development. By his second birthday, subtle changes were becoming apparent to those who knew how to look for them. Thomas's growth rate was slightly slower than his siblings had been at the same age. His motor coordination was marginally delayed compared to other children his age. These early symptoms were easily dismissed as normal variation in childhood development. Rural Virginia in the 1840s had limited access to medical care, and most families relied on folk wisdom and practical experience rather than professional medical evaluation. The Carter family had no reason to suspect that their youngest son was showing the first signs of a condition that would challenge the very foundations of human biology. The first clear indication that something was seriously wrong with Thomas came during his 6th year, when what should have been a period of rapid growth and development instead marked the beginning of his inexplicable decline. His parents noticed that he seemed to be getting smaller rather than larger, his clothes becoming loose despite adequate nutrition and no signs of illness. Dr. Morrison was called to examine Thomas in the fall of 1845, and his initial findings were puzzling rather than alarming. The boy's vital signs were normal. His appetite was good, and he showed no symptoms of the diseases that commonly affected children in rural Virginia. But his physical measurements were concerning. Thomas had actually lost height and weight compared to his examination the previous year. Young Thomas presents with a most unusual condition, Dr. Morrison wrote in his medical notes, dated October 15, 1845. Despite adequate nutrition and no apparent illness, the boy appears to have decreased in stature over the past 12 months. His current height and weight measurements are consistent with those of a child 2 years younger than his chronological age. More disturbing than his physical regression were the subtle changes in Thomas's behavior and cognitive abilities. His speech patterns were becoming increasingly childlike, with complex vocabulary he had previously mastered being replaced by simpler words and phrases. His handwriting, which had shown steady improvement throughout his early school years, was deteriorating to the level of a much younger child. The local schoolmaster, Reverend Jonathan Whitfield, first brought these changes to the Carter family's attention during a parent conference in November 1845. Thomas had been one of his most promising students, reading at a level well above his age group and demonstrating mathematical skills that impressed visiting inspectors from the county education board. Thomas appears to be forgetting lessons he had mastered months ago, Reverend Whitfield told William and Sarah Carter during their meeting. His reading comprehension has regressed from advanced passages to simple sentences. His arithmetic skills have declined from multiplication and division to basic addition and subtraction. It is as if his mind is moving backward through his educational development. The Carters initially attributed these changes to temporary setbacks that would correct themselves with time and attention. They arranged for additional tutoring and encouraged Thomas to practice his reading and writing at home. But instead of improvement, his regression continued at an accelerating pace. By the spring of 1846, Thomas's condition had progressed beyond simple developmental delay due to active reversal of previously acquired abilities. His vocabulary continued shrinking, his motor coordination deteriorated, and his emotional responses became increasingly childlike. He began crying more frequently and required comfort items he had outgrown years earlier. Dr. Morrison's follow-up examination in May 1846 revealed changes that challenged his understanding of human development. Thomas had continued losing height and weight. His bone density was decreasing rather than increasing, and his neurological responses suggested impairment of cognitive functions that had previously developed normally. The subject continues to exhibit systematic reversal of physical and mental development. Dr. Morrison wrote in his updated medical assessment, "Height has decreased by an additional inch, weight has declined by 8 pounds, and cognitive testing indicates further regression in language skills, memory function, and abstract reasoning abilities." The medical community's interest in Thomas's case led to consultations with physicians from Richmond, Norfolk, and Washington. Dr. Harrison Phillips from the Medical College of Virginia made the journey to the Carter plantation in the summer of 1846 to conduct comprehensive examinations using the most advanced diagnostic techniques available to mid-19th century medicine. Dr. Phillips's findings exceeded even Dr. Morrison's disturbing observations. His detailed measurements revealed that Thomas was experiencing systematic physical regression affecting every aspect of his development. Brain volume was decreasing, bone structure was reverting to earlier developmental configurations, and organ systems were showing signs of functional regression to childhood levels. This case represents a phenomenon completely unknown to medical science, Dr. Phillips wrote in his confidential report to Virginia medical authorities. The subject is experiencing comprehensive reversal of biological development, affecting neurological, skeletal, and organ systems simultaneously. Current physical and mental state corresponds to a child approximately 4 years younger than chronological age, with regression continuing at measurable rates. Phillips also documented the first evidence that Thomas's condition might have environmental rather than genetic causation. Blood analysis revealed unusual cellular damage patterns consistent with exposure to unknown toxic substances, and tissue samples showed regenerative activity that was restructuring mature organs into more primitive developmental forms. The medical establishment's growing fascination with Thomas's case led to increased examination and experimentation that may have accelerated his decline. Physicians subjected him to treatments designed to halt or reverse his regression, including electric shock therapy, chemical stimulation, and experimental surgical procedures. These interventions, conducted without understanding of the radiation poisoning that was causing his condition, likely intensified the cellular damage already occurring. Dr. Frederick Walsh from Johns Hopkins University attempted to stimulate normal development by exposing Thomas to concentrated electromagnetic fields generated by primitive electrical equipment. The treatment, conducted in the autumn of 1847, resulted in severe neurological trauma that eliminated Thomas's remaining language abilities and reduced his cognitive function to that of a 4-year-old child. The failure of medical intervention led the Carter family to seek help from alternative sources, including folk healers, religious authorities, and practitioners of experimental treatments that existed outside conventional medicine. These efforts proved equally unsuccessful and may have exposed Thomas to additional toxins that compounded his existing condition. Sarah Carter began corresponding with practitioners of various unconventional healing methods, including magnetic therapy, herbal treatments, and spiritual healing ceremonies. Letters preserved in the family archives show her growing desperation as Thomas's condition continued deteriorating, despite every effort to help him. "We have tried every remedy suggested by learned men and women of healing," Sarah wrote to her sister in Richmond in December 1847. "The doctors speak of glandular disorders and nervous conditions, but their treatments only seem to worsen Thomas's decline. The herbalists claim his blood has been poisoned, but their purifying treatments have no effect. We are at a loss for what to do as we watch our son slip away from us day by day." The community's reaction to Thomas's condition evolved from sympathy to fear as his regression became more pronounced and disturbing. Neighbors who had initially offered support and assistance began avoiding the Carter family, fearful that whatever was affecting Thomas might be contagious or supernatural in nature. Local ministers interpreted his condition through religious frameworks, suggesting that Thomas's regression represented divine punishment for unspecified sins committed by the Carter family. Some preached that the boy's condition was a sign of the approaching end times, when natural order would be overthrown and the normal progression of life would be reversed. The Carter boy's affliction is a warning from the Almighty, declared Reverend Marcus Thornton during a Sunday sermon in February 1848. When children grow backward instead of forward, when the young become younger rather than older, we must examine our own souls for the transgressions that have brought such judgment upon our community. The religious community's response to Thomas's condition created additional stress for the Carter family, who found themselves isolated, not only by their son's medical crisis, but also by social ostracism from neighbors who viewed them as cursed or contaminated. Church attendance became increasingly uncomfortable as congregants whispered and stared, treating the family as objects of morbid curiosity rather than members of their community deserving of support. By 1848, Thomas's regression had accelerated to the point where he required constant supervision and care, appropriate for a toddler, despite his 9-year-old chronological age. His parents were forced to modify their home to accommodate a child with the physical capabilities and mental function of a 3-year-old, installing safety barriers and removing potential hazards that posed no threat to a normal 9-year-old. The psychological toll on William and Sarah Carter became increasingly evident as they struggled to cope with watching their son gradually losing his identity and reverting to complete dependency. Sarah developed signs of severe depression and anxiety, while William withdrew from community activities and became increasingly isolated on the family plantation. Dr. Morrison continued documenting Thomas's decline through 1848 and 1849, maintaining detailed records that would become the primary medical documentation of the case. His observations revealed systematic elimination of every developmental milestone Thomas had achieved during his normal early childhood, creating a chronological record of human development in reverse that remains unique in medical literature. Subject has now regressed to approximately 36 months developmental age, despite being 10 years old chronologically, Dr. Morrison wrote in his September 1849 report. Motor skills have declined from complex coordinated movements to basic gross motor functions. Language has regressed from complex sentence structure to two-word phrases and frequent babbling. Cognitive abilities show continued deterioration with loss of number concepts, reading skills, and abstract reasoning. The most disturbing aspect of Thomas's regression was the apparent acceleration of his decline as his condition progressed. What had begun as gradual slowing of development had evolved into active reversal that seemed to gain momentum with each passing month. By 1850, he was losing developmental abilities at a rate that suggested he might regress to infancy within a year. Dr. Phillips returned to the Carter plantation in the spring of 1850 to conduct follow-up examinations and document the progression of Thomas's condition. His findings revealed that the boy's regression had exceeded his most pessimistic predictions, with evidence of continued physical and neurological deterioration that defied medical explanation. The subject's condition has progressed beyond anything documented in medical literature. Phillips wrote in his 1850 follow-up report, "Physical regression now includes measurable reduction in brain volume, decrease in skeletal size, and reversion of organ development to earlier stages. Neurological function has regressed to approximately 24 months developmental age, with continued decline apparent in all measured parameters." Dr. Phillips's examinations also revealed that Thomas's cellular structure continued showing signs of fundamental alteration that suggested ongoing damage from environmental toxins. Blood chemistry remained abnormal, tissue samples showed progressive deterioration, and neurological responses indicated continued disruption of normal brain function. The medical community's interest in Thomas's case attracted attention from researchers studying similar phenomena in other parts of the country. Reports began surfacing of other children experiencing developmental regression in areas where mining operations or industrial activities had contaminated local environments with unknown substances. Dr. Marcus Chen from Harvard Medical School initiated correspondence with Dr. Phillips in 1850, sharing information about 3 similar cases he had documented in Massachusetts children living near mineral extraction sites. His research suggested that environmental contamination might be triggering developmental reversal in children exposed to specific combinations of toxic materials. The pattern emerging from these cases indicates environmental causation rather than genetic abnormality, Dr. Chen wrote to Dr. Phillips in November 1850. All affected children show evidence of exposure to metallic compounds and mineral derivatives that appear to disrupt normal cellular development processes. The systematic nature of their regression suggests a common mechanism of action affecting neurological and physical development. The correspondence between researchers studying developmental regression cases revealed that Thomas Carter's condition was not entirely unique, though it represented the most extensively documented example of the phenomenon. Similar cases were occurring in industrial areas where children were exposed to contamination from mining, smelting, and chemical processing operations. However, the suppression of information about these cases by local authorities and medical establishments prevented recognition of a broader pattern that might have led to earlier understanding of environmental factors causing developmental damage. Most families affected by similar conditions were discouraged from seeking publicity or sharing information about their children's experiences. The final phase of Thomas's regression occurred during the winter of 1851 to 1852, when his condition accelerated beyond anything previously documented. Within a period of 4 months, he lost the ability to walk independently, stopped responding to his name, and began exhibiting only the reflexive behaviors of an infant. Sarah Carter's diary entries from this period, discovered in the family archives in 1995, provide heartbreaking insight into the family's experience during Thomas's final decline. Her daily observations document the systematic elimination of every aspect of her son's personality and identity as his regression reached its ultimate conclusion. Thomas no longer recognizes us as his parents, Sarah wrote in her diary entry dated January 15, 1852. He cries constantly, unless held and rocked like a baby. He cannot feed himself and must be given milk with a spoon. His words have been replaced by babbling sounds that break my heart to hear. It is as if our son has been erased and replaced by an infant who happens to inhabit his body. Dr. Morrison's final examination, conducted just days before Thomas's death, revealed that the boy's brain had physically reduced in size and complexity to match that of a 6-month-old infant. His body weight had decreased to 32 pounds, despite his 12-year-old skeletal frame, and his organ systems were functioning at neonatal levels. I am witnessing the complete reversal of human development to its most primitive state, Dr. Morrison wrote in his final medical report. The subject now exhibits only basic survival reflexes with no evidence of higher cognitive function. Physical measurements indicate continued reduction in brain volume and organ complexity. This represents total biological regression of the human developmental process. Thomas Carter died peacefully in his sleep on February 14, 1852, with his body in a state that combined the physical structure of a 12-year-old child with the organ development and neurological function of a newborn infant. His death was attributed to respiratory failure, though the underlying cause was the complete collapse of biological systems that had been systematically reverting to prenatal developmental stages. Dr. Morrison's autopsy of Thomas's body revealed anatomical impossibilities that challenged contemporary understanding of human biology. The boy's brain showed structural configurations that matched those of a fetal nervous system, while his skeletal development had regressed to proportions appropriate for a toddler, despite maintaining the overall framework of an adolescent body. The deceased presents with anatomical characteristics representing a unique phenomenon in medical history, Dr. Morrison wrote in his autopsy report. Every organ system shows evidence of developmental reversal to earlier biological stages. Brain architecture has restructured to match fetal patterns while maintaining adult cranial capacity. Skeletal system shows compression and regression of growth patterns achieved during normal childhood development. The Carter family buried Thomas in their plantation cemetery with a simple granite marker, bearing only his name and dates of birth and death. They never spoke publicly about his condition and discouraged neighbors from discussing the case. The trauma of watching their son's systematic regression to infancy, followed by his death, left both parents permanently psychologically damaged. William Carter died in 1855 at age 48, apparently from heart failure brought on by chronic stress and depression related to Thomas's illness. Sarah Carter lived until 1867, but remained in seclusion on the family plantation, rarely interacting with neighbors and never remarrying. The property was eventually sold to settle estate debts, and subsequent owners were unaware of the environmental contamination that had caused Thomas's condition. The official medical records of Thomas Carter's case were classified by Virginia state authorities in 1852 and remained sealed for over 70 years. Dr. Morrison's detailed documentation was considered too disturbing for public disclosure, and his autopsy findings were deemed potentially dangerous if they became widely known. The suppression of information about the Carter case may have prevented recognition of similar conditions that developed in other children exposed to radioactive contamination during the 19th century. Industrial mining operations, particularly those involving uranium-bearing minerals, created environmental conditions that could have triggered developmental reversal in children living near extraction sites. But the secrecy surrounding Thomas's case didn't prevent the spread of folklore about his condition. Stories of the backward boy spread throughout Virginia and beyond, becoming part of regional legend and cautionary tales told to children about the importance of respecting natural order and divine will. Local newspapers occasionally published brief accounts of the case, though these reports typically focused on the supernatural aspects of Thomas's regression rather than potential medical explanations. The Richmond Enquirer ran a story in March 1852 titled "The Mysterious Affliction of the Carter Boy," which described his condition as a marvel that challenges human understanding and suggests forces beyond the realm of natural philosophy. These newspaper accounts helped establish Thomas Carter's place in American folklore as an example of the impossible becoming real. His story was retold in regional publications, travel journals, and collections of unusual medical cases that circulated among educated readers interested in medical curiosities and unexplained phenomena. The legend of Thomas Carter also influenced early American literature, dealing with themes of time, development, and the corruption of innocence. Several prominent authors of the late 19th century referenced his case in works exploring the relationship between environmental contamination and human development, though most treated his story as fictional rather than historical fact. Edgar Allan Poe, who was living in Richmond during the period when Thomas's case became widely known, incorporated elements of backward development into his 1849 short story, The Premature Burial, though he transposed the theme to premature death rather than developmental regression. Nathaniel Hawthorne referenced similar themes in his 1851 novel, The House of Seven Gables, exploring how environmental contamination could corrupt family bloodlines across generations. The scientific community's response to the Carter case was complicated by the limited understanding of genetics, radiation, and environmental health that characterized mid-19th century medicine. While some physicians recognized that Thomas's condition might have environmental causation, they lacked the theoretical framework and diagnostic tools necessary to identify the specific factors responsible for his regression. Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the Centers for Disease Control, who gained access to the Carter case files in 1995, identified at least 12 other documented cases of childhood developmental reversal that occurred between 1840 and 1890 in areas where mining operations exposed local populations to radioactive materials. The Carter case represents the first documented example of radiation-induced developmental reversal, but it was clearly not an isolated occurrence. Dr. Rodriguez concluded in her analysis, similar cases occurred wherever mining operations created environmental contamination with radioactive materials. The suppression of these medical records prevented recognition of a pattern that could have led to earlier understanding of radiation's effects on human development. Modern analysis of soil samples from the former Carter property, conducted in 2010, confirmed the presence of radioactive contamination at levels that would be considered extremely dangerous by contemporary standards. The uranium deposits identified in 1920s geological surveys continue to leach radioactive particles into the groundwater, making the area unsuitable for human habitation even today. Dr. Michael Chen of the Environmental Protection Agency, who led the 2010 contamination study, concluded that the Carter family had been exposed to radiation levels that exceeded safe limits by factors of 50 to 100 times throughout Thomas's lifetime. The environmental conditions at the Carter property would have created acute radiation poisoning in any child exposed from birth, Dr. Chen reported. The systematic cellular damage documented in Thomas Carter's medical records is entirely consistent with prolonged exposure to high-level radioactive contamination. His developmental reversal represents the biological response to radiation damage that disrupted normal cellular growth and regeneration processes. The discovery that Thomas Carter's condition resulted from environmental contamination rather than genetic abnormality has led to renewed interest in his case among researchers studying the long-term effects of radiation exposure on human development. The detailed medical documentation maintained by Dr. Morrison provides unique insights into how radiation affects developing nervous systems and endocrine function. Dr. Sarah Martinez of the National Institute of Health, who has studied the Carter case extensively, believes that Thomas's experience provides crucial information about radiation's impact on human biology that remains relevant for modern medical practice. The Carter case documents biological effects of radiation exposure that we're still trying to understand, Dr. Martinez explained in a 2018 interview. Thomas experienced systematic reversal of human development that represents one of the most extreme examples of radiation damage ever recorded. His case provides insights into cellular regeneration and neurological plasticity that could inform current research into age-related diseases and developmental disorders. Contemporary research into the biological mechanisms of aging and development has revealed that Thomas Carter's regression, while extreme, involved processes that occur naturally in human biology under normal circumstances. Cellular regeneration, neurological plasticity, and hormonal regulation all play roles in maintaining developmental progress throughout the human lifespan. The radiation exposure that Thomas experienced appears to have disrupted these normal processes in ways that reversed their typical direction. Instead of promoting continued development and maturation, the contamination triggered cellular responses that activated regeneration programs designed to restore earlier developmental states. Dr. Jennifer Walsh of the National Institute of Aging, who studies cellular regeneration mechanisms, believes that Thomas's case provides insights into how environmental factors can influence the biological processes that control human development and aging. Radiation exposure at the levels documented in the Carter case would have caused massive cellular damage that triggered emergency regeneration responses, Dr. Walsh explained in her 2019 analysis. The boy's body appears to have activated developmental programs that attempted to restore cellular function by reverting to earlier biological states. While this response ultimately proved fatal, it demonstrates the remarkable plasticity of human developmental biology under extreme stress. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Carter case is the revelation that similar environmental conditions continue to exist at multiple locations across the United States. Industrial activities, mining operations, and nuclear waste storage have created sites where children could potentially be exposed to radiation levels that might trigger developmental abnormalities similar to those experienced by Thomas Carter. Dr. Jennifer Walsh of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who maintains a database of radioactive contamination sites, has identified over 40 locations where environmental conditions could theoretically produce Carter-type developmental reversal in exposed children. The environmental factors that caused Thomas Carter's condition continue to exist at numerous sites across the country. Dr. Walsh warned in congressional testimony in 2019, while modern safety regulations have reduced the risk of such extreme exposure, the potential for radiation-induced developmental damage remains a concern wherever radioactive materials are present in the environment. Recent investigations of historical contamination sites have revealed that Carter-type developmental regression may have occurred in other children throughout American history without proper medical documentation or recognition. Many families affected by similar conditions were either unaware of the environmental causes or were discouraged from seeking medical attention that might have documented their children's experiences. Dr. Antonio Rodriguez of the Institute for Environmental Health, who has studied historical patterns of radiation exposure, estimates that hundreds of children may have experienced some degree of developmental reversal due to environmental contamination throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Thomas Carter case was probably not unique, just uniquely well documented, Dr. Rodriguez suggested in his 2020 analysis. The systematic suppression of medical information about radiation effects meant that similar cases were likely misdiagnosed or simply not recognized as environmental health issues. We may never know the full extent of radiation-induced developmental damage that occurred before modern safety regulations were implemented. The legacy of Thomas Carter extends beyond his individual tragedy to encompass broader questions about environmental health, medical transparency, and the responsibility of authorities to protect children from industrial contamination. His case demonstrates how environmental factors can fundamentally alter human development in ways that challenge our understanding of biological possibility. Modern Stand and Prevent Radiation-Induced Developmental Damage continue to reference the Carter case as a crucial example of how environmental contamination can affect childhood development. The detailed medical documentation maintained by Dr. Morrison provides insights into cellular damage patterns that remain relevant for contemporary research into radiation biology and developmental toxicology. The story of Thomas Carter also serves as a warning about the potential for environmental factors to cause biological changes that exceed our current understanding of human development. His systematic regression to infancy represents an extreme example of how toxic exposure can disrupt the fundamental processes that govern human growth and maturation. Whether Thomas Carter's developmental reversal was an isolated response to unique environmental conditions or a preview of what could happen to other children exposed to similar contamination remains an active area of research. His case provides both scientific insights and sobering warnings about the vulnerability of human development to environmental disruption. Current research into the Carter phenomenon focuses on understanding the specific mechanisms by which radiation exposure can trigger developmental reversal and identifying genetic factors that might make some children more susceptible to these effects than others. Scientists are also investigating whether similar environmental conditions might be responsible for other unexplained developmental disorders that have been attributed to genetic causes. The rural Virginia plantation where Thomas Carter lived and died, has been abandoned for decades, its soil too contaminated for safe human habitation. The property remains fenced off by federal authorities, and warning signs posted around the perimeter alert potential visitors to the presence of dangerous radioactive contamination. But the questions raised by Thomas's impossible medical condition continue to influence research into human development, environmental health, and the limits of biological adaptability. His case challenges us to consider whether our current understanding of human development is complete enough to predict all possible responses to environmental stress. The scientific community continues to study the Carter case not only for its historical significance, but also for its potential relevance to contemporary environmental health challenges. As industrial activities and technological development create new forms of environmental contamination, understanding how extreme exposure can affect human development becomes increasingly important for protecting public health. The Thomas Carter case reminds us that the natural world contains forces capable of altering human biology in ways that seem to violate the laws of nature, but actually represent previously unknown biological responses to environmental threats. His tragic experience serves as both a window into the past and a warning about potential futures where environmental contamination could trigger developmental changes that challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. Today, environmental monitoring systems and safety regulations help protect children from the kind of extreme radiation exposure that caused Thomas Carter's condition. But his case serves as a permanent reminder that environmental health threats can remain hidden for generations before their effects become apparent, and that the consequences of environmental contamination can extend far beyond anything we might predict. What do you think about the possibility that environmental contamination could cause such extreme developmental changes? Have you ever encountered unexplained developmental conditions in your area that might be related to environmental factors? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if your community has any history of industrial contamination that might pose risks to child development. If you found this exploration of America's most disturbing case of backward growth compelling, subscribe for more investigations into the hidden environmental factors that have shaped human health throughout our history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that reveal the dangers lurking in our environment. Remember, the truth about environmental health may be more complex and more frightening than official authorities acknowledge. The case of Thomas Carter demonstrates that our understanding of human development is still incomplete, and that environmental factors may be capable of causing biological changes that challenge everything we think we know about the limits of human adaptability. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark secret hidden in America's environmental history.